Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this second lecture in the course on technology and the future of medicine. Today we're talking about the technological singularity explained and promoted. The objectives of today's lecture. You should understand that you should not fear complexity. Do not seek the one great truth. There are many truths and they can be true concurrently. So you may think a statement like that, needs validation. And I'm telling you that on this coming Sunday, we're having a dinner with Shauna Panja, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this a lot. So I'll let you know if my thoughts about this issue change. And as you know, Shauna is then doing the two teaching sessions next week. And just a bit of housekeeping. You all look like you have lots of friends and associates. You're part of a huge entourage, and I'd like you to arrange for parts of your entourage to visit this class during the time that Shauna's teaching, particularly on the 19th, which is the workshop, because the workshop will work much better if we have about 20, 25 people in the room, so that would be different teams of 4 and 5. It's a lot of fun. You can watch the videos from previous years' workshops and see what I mean. The more heterogeneous the group, the better. The people don't need to have any other characteristic except that they want to be here. And if they would like to take part, please have them join us for that workshop on September the 19th. Okay, other objectives this morning. Understand the three main schools of belief about the technological singularity. Understand the four main paths to achieving the singularity. Understand the history of the singularity and Marcus Hutter's main ideas about it. Okay, so Marcus Hutter, as I explained last time, is probably the most advanced thinker in this area about exactly what the singularity will look like, feel like, sound like. But his beliefs about interaction with this class really didn't work with the class. So we have this canned video of him with an audio and PowerPoint. So I'm going to, with his permission today, present to you some of his slides. And you can also, if you wish, listen to him presenting the same slides on your own time. And you will remember that this slide set from Marcus Hutter was what Jonathan Schaefer said was one of the most intellectually difficult challenges he had ever seen. So the Dean of Science considers this very tough stuff to really understand what Marcus Hutter's talking about, which goes again to that top, not being afraid of complexity. And finally, there's the idea of promoting the notion of the technological singularity, getting people out there to think more about the future, to help shape the future in positive ways. And then the idea behind the new holiday that we're creating, Future Day. It's a little bit amusing. I believe in 2012 there were 12 places in the world that celebrated Future Day. In 2013, there were fewer than that. So we're kind of fighting a trend of this new holiday dying. But anyway, we plan for this holiday, March 1st, 2014, to loom very large in Edmonton. And so we have big plans for that. What do I mean, do not fear complexity? There's beauty in complexity. The real world is complex. You can imagine perfecting a Solez recommended skill of double-think with equipoise. What is double-think with equipoise? Well, double-think you would recognize as a term from the 1949 book by George Orwell 1984. It's the idea of holding in your mind two conflicting ideas and believing them both. So accepting two things that seem to be in conflict with each other. And equipoise is the idea of doing that with balance and equilibrium. Equipoise is a particularly Canadian term. When it's used in ethics of clinical trials, it is perhaps accidentally something that's much more part of the thinking about Canadian clinical trials than US clinical trials or European clinical trials. So when I came to Canada, I found there's not quite as much patriotism here as I had encountered in the US. But one thing you can be patriotic about is this idea of equipoise. It is something that seems to be mostly Canadian as an idea. Now, what do I mean about holding conflicting ideas in your mind and believing them both? Well, think about my field. I'm a transplant pathologist in medicine. So that means that I rely on predicting what the future of transplantation will be. And you might say, well, of course, there's only one future, but actually at the moment, it looks like there are two different futures and they're both occurring. So one is the creation of organs via stem cells. So these will be organs that are perfectly matched to you, that are derived from your own cells and would presumably completely replace the transplanting of organs from other people. At the same time, in many countries, the deceased donor donation rate is rising. And you can imagine, following that curve, that there will come a time when all the need for transplanted organs, if those trends continue, will be fulfilled by more people who die donating organs. And what's the time course of those? It's about the same. So if you look at the period of time when from the deceased donor donation rate, there'll be no waiting list at all. There are enough people donating their organs when they die that it will fulfill all needs. It's about the same time as when we think stem cells will be able to create organs for everyone. So in that sense, it makes sense to keep both of those ideas in mind in predicting what's going to happen in the next few years, even though they seem to be directly opposed to each other. They can occur at the same time, and many other ideas that seem directly opposed to each other, like some of the ones that we'll talk about today, could presumably also occur at the same time. Peter Diamandis, who you'll hear me talk about quite a bit in this course, he's the CEO of the X Prize, which provides these huge financial prizes for things like autonomous vehicles that can cross the desert and private space flight. A lot of scientific advances have been made by providing these large prizes and having a lot of people spend more money in the preparation for competing for the prize than the prize itself. Many, many-fold more money spent in competing for the prize than what the prize is actually worth. And it's really moved science forward. Peter is also one of the two co-founders of the Singularity University that I attended in the spring of 2010, and a lot of the ideas that I'm telling you about today come from that. So what he has said, when faced with a choice between two desirable goals, choose both. And so that's kind of what I'm saying. You shouldn't think of all of life as kind of decision trees where you come to a branch and you choose one, and life is not really like that. Sometimes you can choose both. The technological singularity is the idea of machines becoming smarter than we are, taking over the agenda of the world, and we can only then understand what's going on and have some influence if we cooperate or merge with machines in some way. Put another way, you all remember Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. In that book, a world is confronted that's much more organic than expected. You remember the croquet game, where everything's alive. The mallet's alive, and the ball is alive, and everything is fluid and moving. And you remember the quote, "The main difficulty Alice had was in managing her flamingo." So trying to hit the ball with the flamingo, and so on and so forth. And so we face a future potentially that's exactly the opposite of that, a future that's much less organic than expected. A future where machines could potentially replace us entirely, so the human species would no longer exist. The technological singularity is in part a situation where we face a world that could develop without us. So let's talk about, just briefly, the three main schools of belief and then the four main paths. So one school of belief is the accelerating change school, where you look at the pattern of exponential change. It's going faster and faster, and at a certain point, you reach these super sentient machines. So that's the accelerating change school. The event horizon school is more of a kind of accidental thing where you get close to a certain point and then there's this great period of uncertainty, exactly like the black hole of physics, where you can no longer make predictions about what's going to occur. And that's the event horizon school of belief. Then there's the one that Marcus Hutter talks about, and that's intelligence explosion. And his essay from 2012 is entitled, "Can Intelligence Explode?" And I've listed the reference for that in this series of slides. So then, within those schools, there are four main paths, in other words, exact ways in which we could achieve this idea of the super sentient machine. One is to create an artificial intelligence that exceeds human intelligence. Another is to build a human-computer interface that allows humans to go beyond their innate intelligence to a significant extent, so-called cybernetic singularity. The third is, and maybe the least likely, because it would be slow, right? And that's find ways to speed up biology so that our biological brains get very, very intelligent very, very fast. That's probably not likely to occur, and so is the least likely of these four paths. And finally is the situation where the internet wakes up, where one day you find that the internet is alive and speaking to you. It may seem like it's speaking to you now, but it's really not. But where the whole internet becomes a kind of being and one that can outthink you. So that path is where large computer networks exhibit beyond human intelligence. All these different variations on the belief in the technological singularity and the paths by which it's reached are reflected in the courses at Singularity University. Many of you know that Singularity University is not a real university at all, but anyway, it gives courses of two types. It gives short courses like 7 to 12 days for older people, and so that's the executive course, which I I took a nine-day executive course in February, March 2010, and also Future Med is a particular short course that they give focused mainly around medicine. And then there's something that all of you could think about, and that is the graduate course, which is, I believe, 13 weeks in the summer. And as many young people, the competition for it is absolutely tremendous, but it's a lot of fun to be a part of. And you'll meet people who are part of both of those programs. Shauna Pandya was in the graduate course, and she's also been part of the staff there. She's done so many amazing things, it's kind of hard to conceive of packing all that into one life of a person who's about the same age as those of you sitting in the seats. So the experience of attending SU is one that grows and grows after completion of the course. You think of many other experiences where the day you finish the course, you start forgetting what you learned in the course, and rapidly within a few weeks, you've forgotten most of it, and just a tiny little blip in your life experience that recedes pretty quickly. And somehow Singularity University is entirely the opposite of that. You make all sorts of friendships and contacts there, and your life expands, and it kind of rapidly grows, and it keeps on going after the formal course that you took there finishes. You're welcome to join us if you want. You can sit down. You don't have to stand. Yep. So this is a picture of me at that executive course in 2010. I'm the guy with a hat. The reason I don't wear a hat in this course is the lighting just doesn't work. I look like half of my face is gone if I'm wearing a hat, so it's just totally unsatisfactory. So I've been arguing for a long time for new cross-disciplinary structures in universities to prepare us for the future. And it was kind of, amusing in the beginning. I thought if I talked about this passionately enough that someone else would do it. But I'm a full-time faculty member at a university. Why don't I do it? So anyway, that's the reason that we have this course, that it became obvious to me that if we were going to do this, I should do it. And we don't know of any similar courses that exist to this one anywhere in the world. And I don't intend for that situation to stay that way. You may say, well, that's really cool that we're the only one in the world, but I would like to see this course replicated in maybe hundreds of places around the world. And one of the reasons we wrote that recent article that was just published online yesterday is to try to promote that idea of hundreds of similar courses appearing all over the world. This is Peter Diamandis' book. It's a very, very optimistic, happy book. If you have a day when you're feeling sort of down, well, you can read this book and suddenly you'll feel, wow, life's pretty rosy. So there are various thoughts about the future. And I think when we were planning this course, as I told you last time, the students said, Dr. Solez, don't hold back, tell us everything. So I'm trying to do that. This is one end of the spectrum, the idea of a post-scarcity world where anything you want you can have, where virtual reality is better than real reality. So in a sense, any experience you can have, friendships can still be maintained. We figure that out somehow. And what you've been used to your whole life, which is the idea of unfulfilled wants and needs, would no longer be the case. That honestly, you have to then decide, when you have everything that you want and need, what do you do then? It's a situation you've never expected to be in. But that's basically what that book predicts. There are a bunch of other books that predict exactly the opposite. But terrible, terrible world where everything's going wrong and every calamity you can think of. And, technology eventually causing the demise of the human race and so on. So what we intend to do in this course is to teach you about a number of different scenarios, and almost certainly one or more of them will come true. You just don't know which one. And you can help determine that. I think no matter how you think of it, whether you believe in free will or a deterministic world in which there's the appearance of free will, either way, there are things you can do that can help secure a positive outcome. You may occasionally at a party late at night hear somebody criticizing Ray Kurzweil as this guy with these fixed, stupid beliefs. And what I'm here to tell you is, first of all, he's not famous enough to have security yet. He walks around like an ordinary person. One of the worst things that ever happened to him, when I met him, I was eating chips, and I had chips all over my hand. I'm shaking his hand, and he's looking at all this chip, like sandpaper going on between us. So he is extremely flexible. He has, since about 1999, been devoting most of his time to responding to people criticizing his work. So he has these arguments down much better than you or anyone at this party you're at could possibly have. He's reachable. He's not narrow in his thinking at all. And if you write to him and say, well, I think this and that, he'll say, well, I partially agree with you. Yes, that's right, but have you thought of this? And then he'll tell you something that's just absolutely amazing that you never thought of, that's another side of the same argument. So he's not narrow. He doesn't have fixed ideas. His book, which I brought last time and I'll bring next time, is a little bit dense and challenging to read. It's not bad writing, it's just stuff on every single page. And so many people can't get beyond about 30 or 40 pages, but Jonathan White read it in a few evenings. I've read it. It's sort of a rite of passage in this class if you actually succeed in reading that book. So it's something to think about and consider. Okay, so now the history of the technological singularity. It goes back, believe it or not, to 1847, and to R. Thornton, the editor of the Expounder of Primitive Christianity. Now there is a periodical you probably haven't encountered before. He wrote about the recent invention of the four-function mechanical calculator, saying such machines, by which the scholar may, by turning a crank, grind out the solution to a problem without the fatigue of mental application, would, by its introduction into schools, do incalculable injury. But who knows that such machines, when brought to greater perfection, may not think of a plan to remedy all their own defects and then grind out ideas beyond the ken of the mortal mind. So that's sort of the idea of machines replacing us. It was already in this guy's thought patterns in 1847. In 1863, 4 years after Darwin published On the Origin of the Species, Samuel Butler published a letter entitled Darwin Among the Machines. It compares human evolution to machine evolution and prophesies half in jest that machines will eventually replace man in the supremacy of the earth, saying, in the course of the ages, we shall find ourselves the inferior race. The letter raises many of the themes now being debated by proponents of the technological singularity. And then in the book Erewhon, you'll recognize Erewhon is nowhere backwards, right? So it's a rather amusing book. He writes, "There's no security against the ultimate development of machine consciousness in the fact of machines possessing little consciousness now. A mollusk has not much consciousness. Reflect upon the extraordinary advance which machines have made during the last few hundred years, and note how slowly the animal and vegetable kingdoms are advancing. The more highly organized machines are creatures not so much of yesterday, but as of the last 5 minutes, so to speak, in comparison with past time." Okay, now the next 28 slides are modified from Marcus Hutter's presentation. They're pretty similar to his presentation. The colors are a bit different, and I've left out a few and so on. But what we used to do is I would give this lecture, and then we would have him do his actual lecture. So you sort of got this twice. This year, you're only getting this once, unless you choose to watch him giving the same material. This is some of the intellectual background of the idea. The best known book, of course, is the one I referred to earlier, the 2005 book, The Singularity is Near, by Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil has an earlier book from 1999, The Age of Spiritual Machines, and really the Singularity is Near was a book that came from his responding to critics from the 1999 book. And this is Moore's Law that we talked about last time, of the rate of exponential change that predicts that soon machines will be smarter than the human brain and then all human brains. So smarter than the aggregate intelligence of the entire human race soon. Okay, superintelligence and Moore's Law. Moore's Law has been valid for about 50 years. As long as there's demand for more computing power, Moore's Law could continue to hold. It's not substrate dependent. It's not dependent upon the kind of chip that you're using or the kind of computer operating system. It will be valid, presumably, for many more decades before computronium is reached. Computronium is where you turn everything into computers. We don't know that that's going to happen. It's just an idea. In 20 to 30 years, the raw computing power of a single computer will reach 10 to the 15th to 10 to the 16th flops per second. And the computing capacity of the human brain is about the same, so beyond that point, computers will be smarter than we are. Software will not lag far behind. So this gives you an idea of acceleration of doubling patterns, ending up with super intelligent machines around 2045. Other ways to look at this is by epochs of evolution. It's from Kurzweil's book in 2005. Is the singularity negotiable? Can we say, no, we don't want that? Hutter doesn't really think so. He thinks we're probably already beyond the point where we could do anything to reverse this, that technology has a natural momentum, and it would be very, very hard to stop it through legislation or any other means. So whatever is going to happen will happen. The inevitability, he thinks, one analogy is like the inevitability of politics and global warming. You would imagine there are things that the world could do to completely stop global warming, but it's not going to happen. And similarly, the idea of a spaceship coming close to a black hole, if it had enormous propulsion, it could get away again, but it probably wouldn't have that, so it'd be sucked into the black hole. So he believes that the singularity will occur. There's no way out. There's some counterintuitive things about it. From the outside, it's going to seem like white noise. It's going to seem like the so-called Library of Babel. You can look up that term. That would be a library containing all books, not just books normally printed, but books full of errors, books misprinted, and so on. You could imagine a library containing all books that would be completely worthless because you couldn't find anything in it. So there are some ironic things like that about a huge amount of data that cannot be assessed. And so that's sort of what the technological singularity would be like if you were viewing it from the outside. If it was not occurring in your world, but you're looking into a world where it is occurring, all you'd see is white noise. Each way, outsiders cannot witness a true intelligence singularity. We don't really know which way it will occur, whether it will be something internal or external. Historically, mankind has always been outward exploring. Strict intelligence singularity is neither experienced by the insiders nor by the outsiders. It can't be understood by the outsiders, and if you're on the inside, you wouldn't notice anything because everything's speeding up at the same rate. So to you, it would just seem like normal life. But eventually, even so, biology would not be able to keep up. So the speeding up would have to be based on machine intelligence rather than biological. So we have to then define intelligence. There have been numerous attempts to define it. Legge and Hutter provided a collection of more than 70 definitions in 2007, both from individual researchers as well as collective attempts. It's not just speed. Somebody smarter than you are doesn't mean they can just think faster, because it's also sort of a quality thing, right? Somebody could be thinking much faster than you are, but with much lower quality thoughts, and the end result wouldn't be anything terribly impressive. So it has to be defined in other ways. What would superintelligences actually do? So there are various ways to look at it. In biological evolution, there's been mutation, recombination, selection, increases intelligence if that is useful for survival and procreation. In animals, higher intelligence increases the chance of survival and number of offspring. In humans, that isn't any longer true. Smarter people don't have more offspring than less intelligence. So in human beings, intelligence is now positively correlated with power and economic success, but actually negatively with the number of children. And in terms of memes, mimetics, genetic evolution has been largely replaced by mimetic evolution. so that things occurring in your lifetime where human beings are changing, it's not due to changed biology. The replication, variation, selection, and spreading of ideas causing the cultural evolution. What activities are intelligent? What activities does evolution select for? It's sort of hard to know what to choose here, you know? Self-preservation, self-replication, spreading, colonizing the universe. You realize bacteria do that very well. And all of you sitting here, you may think of yourselves as human, but in your body there are more bacterial cells than our human cells. If we replace those cells with another kind of, you know, bacterial cells, then you yourself would function differently. This, you know, bacterial colonization of your body is an important part of you that determines many things about health and how you function. So I don't think we just want to look at spreading and colonizing as characterizing intelligence, because we don't think that bacteria are actually intelligent, although they're very successful in some other ways. What about the creation of faster, better, higher intelligences? Maybe that's a sign of intelligence. Learning as much as possible, understanding the universe, maximizing power over men and organizations, transformation of matter into computronium, where everything is a computer, maximum self-sufficiency, the search for the meaning of life. So there are probably more things that you could think of what evolution is selecting for or should. Intelligence is related to rationality, reasoning toward a goal. So the more flexible notion is that the expected utility maximization and cumulative lifetime reward is maximized by intelligence. But who provides that reward? In animals, one can explain a lot of behavior as attempts to maximize rewards, pleasure, and minimize pain. But humans seem to exhibit an astonishing flexibility in choosing their goals and passions, especially during childhood. So during play and that sort of thing. And robots, how will robots be rewarded? Well, we will have the opportunity to decide that, I guess. But you could imagine them being rewarded specifically by a teacher or by a human being, or having the rewards hardwired in. So the reward could be automatic. Goal-oriented behavior often appears to be at odds with long-term pleasure maximization. Your decision to enroll in university was good for your long-time life goals, but maybe not for your day-to-day, pleasure generation. Still, the evolved biological goals and desires to survive, procreate, parent, spread, dominate are seldom disowned. Evolving goals, who sets the goals for superintelligences and how? Initially, obviously, these are machines we are creating, so we'll be able to set those goals, but will they later change? Ultimately, we will lose control, and the AGIs themselves will build further AGIs if they're motivated to do so. Artificial general intelligence is the idea that they're not narrow, they're as broad as we are, as capable of flexible thinking as we are, and this will gain its own dynamic. Some aspects of this might be independent of the initial goal structure and predictable. So you can assume the initial virtual world is a society of cooperating and competing agents. There will be a competition over limited computational resources. Those virtuals who have the goal to acquire them will naturally become more successful compared to those with different goals. And so the end result, soon their society will consist mainly of virtuals whose goal is to compete over resources. Hostility will only be limited if that is in the virtual's best interest. So it could be a very hostile world depending on how this plays out. For instance, current society has replaced war mostly by economic competition, since modern weaponry makes most wars a loss for both sides, while economic competition in most cases benefits at least one side, at least the better of the two. So in these evolutionary virtual worlds, the ability to survive and replicate is a key trait of intelligence, but it's not the sufficient characterization because, as I've said, bacteria are quite successful in this too. You can think of alternative societies, other ways to structure this, global collaboration with no hostile competition. This would likely require a powerful single virtual world government to give up individual privacy and to limit severely individual freedoms, something like an anthill or beehives, or it requires a societal setup can only produce conforming individuals, where the only new people that can be born are those who will conform with all the rules somehow. Might only be possible by severely limiting individuals' creativity, like creating a flock of sheep or a school of fish. Not very attractive concepts. When Marcus Hutter presents these slides, he never seems very happy about any of them. Some of them are scary as heck, of course. Such well-regulated society might better be viewed as a single organism or collective mind, or maybe the virtual world is inhabited from the outset by a single individual. Both virtual worlds could look different, more peaceful or dystopian than the traditional ones created by evolution. Intelligence will define quite differently for such virtual worlds. The adaptiveness of intelligence, how flexible or adaptive the individual is. Deep Blue might be the best chess player on Earth, but is unable to do anything else besides playing chess. On the contrary, higher animals and humans have remarkably broad capacities, can perform well in a wide variety of environments. So Hutter has come up with this characteristic. Intelligence is the ability to achieve goals in a wide variety of environments. It's not specific to human intelligence. He thinks it's the best way of defining it. Of course, eventually, copying virtual structures, it would just be like copying software today, so that once your thinking processes are entirely capable of being captured in software, then one can make as many copies of you as one wishes. And this is what I was talking about before, about the risk-taking behavior, because suddenly you realize that if you die, that you can just be backed up from the last copy and keep on going. It's not clear how that would work exactly. Many of you who do video gaming, you know about multi-boxing, where you can control multiple characters at the same time. Initially, that's quite stereotyped, where like all 5 or all 8 of them are doing the same thing, but eventually you can end up where they're actually doing different things, one person controlling all of that. You can imagine a world where, what are we going to do with all this increased intellect that we have? Well, if you're running 2, 3, 5, 8 lives at once, as opposed to the one that you're running right now, you can imagine that that's going to take a lot of intellectual power. We don't know that that's going to happen with anyone, But when it does happen, don't you imagine that it's going to be regulated in some way? Not everybody will be able to do that. And one of the ideas, there would be this ideal community of maybe about 140 people having a variety of different characteristics. And they would be replicated billions of times all over the world. So in a sense, you'd always know everybody else because there are only these 140 well-known, personalities, but they'd be all over the place. And if you needed a bunch of one type, you could get a team of that particular person to do something for you. We don't know that that's going to happen. The other thing that has been speculated is that the higher status people, for a number of reasons, will become very, very tiny because they need to be very close to the other high status people for very rapid communication. And so people the size of you will rank way down the ladder. And you have these very powerful, very small people controlling everything. So a lot of this is really quite unsatisfactory to think of. One consequence of Hutter's view is that life becomes less valuable. Our society currently values life because life is a valuable commodity, expensive, laborious to replace, produce, raise. We value our own life since evolution selects only organisms that value their life. Our human moral code mainly mimics this with cultural differences and some excesses, but almost every society's moral code values life. If life becomes cheap, motivation to value it will decline, and one has to imagine that would be a very bad thing. Cheap machines would decrease the value of physical labor. Expert knowledge was replaced by handwritten documents, then printed books, finally electronic files. Each transition reduced the value of the same information. So digital computers, in the beginning, the word computer referred to human beings who were figuring out things. That's what computers were at one time. People who computed. Now they are machines. In games, we value our own virtual life and that of our opponents much less than in real life, because games can be reset and one can be resurrected. Maybe all of life will be like that someday. Governments will stop paying my salary when they can get the same research output from a digital version of me, essentially for free. And why not participate in a dangerous fun activity if the worst case is that I have to activate a backup copy of myself from yesterday? So I just missed out on this one anyway, not very well-going day. And the belief in immortality for all of us, because we can be backed up like that, can alter behavior drastically. So this has countless implications: ethical, political, economic, medical, cultural, humanitarian, religious, in art, warfare, everything you can name. With so little value assigned to individual life, perhaps it becomes disposable. Are there universal values? Are there any universal values or qualities we want to see that should survive all this? What do we mean by we? Is it humans? Is it sentient individuals in the world? Or the dominant species or government at the time the question is asked? Could it be diversity? Maybe that's what we're looking to preserve. Or friendly artificial intelligence? Could the long-term survival of at least one conscious species that appreciates its surrounding universe be a universal value? Okay, well, just about this time, you're all getting so depressed that we need now to go on to something entirely different, trying to raise your spirits and stimulate interest in the singularity and study of the future through a new holiday, Future Day, March 1st. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. So this is a picture of our first Future Day, March 1st, 2012. It's Joel Crichton in the center there, the same guy who did the Singularity song that I played for you last time, that's on YouTube. So there were 16 celebrations of Future Day in 2012. I think there were less than a dozen in 2013, so the number is going down. It somehow is not convenient for people to celebrate Future Day, even though, Edmonton is, whatever you think about Edmonton, we had the most spectacular, I think, Future Day celebrations in the entire world, so I'm quite proud of that. And we do have big plans. In 2014, we're planning this thing at the Art Gallery. I hope many of you go to it. It is one way to stimulate people to think about the future, and also, to some extent, to think about how Western thought has advanced in the past. The Paris Salon of 100 years ago moved all of culture forward: literature, poetry, painting, everything. And, could we do something like that here? It's worth a try anyway. How does one create a new holiday? It has to have pageantry. It has to have memorable stuff associated with it. Well, what could there be about that? And how many people could we try to reach? I talked a bit about this last time. The Big Bang Theory, which probably all of you watch. Anyway, it reaches 20 million people in the US alone, and had a specific program about the singularity, October 1st, 2010. But of course, it never talks about anything seriously. So you can't really learn any facts from that program. It just sort of touches on the ideas in a humorous way. This is, you see that singularity with a circle around it there. And that same episode was one of the founders of Apple computers also had a cameo role in that, which you can still watch. Okay, so branding is important. Do you know about the Holi festival in India and the Asian subcontinent? So it's a festival in which people shower each other with pigments. Originally, these were natural pigments that came from plants. But if you think about finding brightly colored things that come from plants, it's hard. It's finding brightly colored things that come from paint pigments is really easy, but paint pigments are toxic. So now in India and other places like that, there's an immense medical literature about all the bad things that happen to people when they're showered with these pigments. But I thought that in Edmonton, we could maybe do something like that with safe, brightly colored pigments. And so we may end up with something like that, but these are just more pictures of the showering of it brings all sectors of society together. I suppose that is in general desirable. It's not without risk, so that's another side of it. You can imagine that you've never in your life been in a circumstance quite like that, and so gives you some idea of how this could be different. That's the color of the, but anyway, maybe that doesn't really do it for you, and you'd like another way of having brightly colored, memorable stuff. So those of you who use Facebook, and that probably includes all of you in this room, know that on my Facebook profile there's always only been one poem, other than the poems that I write, and it's been this one. It's called the Crayola Bomb. Maybe we should develop a Crayola bomb as our next weapon, a happiness weapon, a beauty bomb. And every time a crisis developed, we would launch one, would explode high in the air, explode softly, send thousands, millions of little parachutes into the air, floating down to earth, Boxes of Crayolas, and we wouldn't go cheap either. Boxes of 64 with the sharpener built right in with silver and gold and copper and magenta and peach and lime and amber and umber and all the rest. And the people would smile and get a funny look on their faces and cover the world with imagination. Now, those of you who write poetry, you might be interested that is not the poem the author wrote. The author wrote another line, which is really icky. And so you can see that when the outside world looked at this poem that he had written, he realized that last line should never, ever be there. So it shows you that your audience can do a lot to modify a poem. But anyway, maybe this theme could have something to do with the Future Day holiday. If that doesn't do it for you, you can do brightly colored photographs with the Roomba robotic vacuum cleaner. Who knew? So if you do a time-lapse photograph of the Roomba cleaning your carpet, it can look like this. Wow. And if that doesn't do it for you, then there are hot air balloons, hot air balloon festivals, highly colorful, inspiring, unique experiences in life. Occasionally one hits a high-tension wire and blows up, but we won't think about that. Most times it's safe and fun. And then would we need poetry, songs? You probably know this song, The Windmills of Your Mind. Round, like a circle and a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, on an ever-spinning reel, like a snowball down a mountain or a carnival balloon, like a carousel that's turning, running rings around the moon, like a clock whose hands are sweeping. Past the minutes of its face, the world is like an apple whirling silently in space like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. I don't know whether any of those things appeal to you, but I think you would agree with me that if we're going to make a success of this new holiday, it can't just be, March 1st. It has to have visuals, auditory things that you can smell and taste, and things that really make it different, like all other holidays are really different from every other day of the year. So if you come to whatever we do at the Art Gallery on March 1st, you'll get to participate in that and experience it. Your suggestions about this stuff is greatly welcomed. How can we capture the imagination of the public to start everyone thinking about these matters? We need the mainstream public to regard the future technological singularity as fact, not fiction. We need to promote organized thinking about the future in universities and beyond. And these are the references. Now, I sent you this file, and just to kind of explain, there are 3 Marcus Hutter clickable URLs in this. The one here at the top is the one with his audio file and the PowerPoint. The interesting thing about it is you cannot stop it. So most PowerPoints like that, you can pause and go get a sandwich and come back, but this doesn't seem to have that feature. So I would recommend starting it only when you have, the 55 minutes to actually watch the thing. In that way, it's not entirely under your control, I guess. That's a little bit what Marcus Hutter's like. The other is a text of his essay on Can Intelligence Explode? And the earlier one, I think, is just the PowerPoint file without the audio. So you have all those options. David Chalmers is, as you know, a well-known philosopher in California, and he's also written about this recently in 2010. So that is the last slide, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Yeah, so any questions? My goodness, we have 20 minutes. So, okay, you should go to the microphone to ask a question. Yeah, good. Yeah. Jason, yes.
So right at the beginning, we were talking about the donations of organ donors and such.
Right.
All of a sudden exceeding. If we're starting to live longer and longer lifetimes, the age of the donor, I would think, starts to become really important.
Yes. So, I think it becomes really boring if I talk a lot about what I actually do in my mainstream day job, but you're absolutely right. So, from the point of view of a transplant pathologist looking at the biopsies from these kidneys, these two divergent paths, if we start using deceased donor organs from older and older people, the amount of pathologic change that will be already in the organ before you put it into somebody comes greater and greater, in the question of which ones to use and which not to use. Yeah, and of course, the situation's entirely different. If you're growing organs from stem cells, you might say, well, those would be perfect. Those are not necessarily perfect. You can grow a stem cell origin kidney that lacks loops of Henle, for instance. It cannot concentrate the urine at all. So you circulate the blood through that, your entire body water would pour out into the urine over about an hour, and you'd be dead. So there are all sorts of bad things that also would need to be looked at there. So the pathologist looking at the organ being put in has a challenge, things to look for either way. But we really don't know which way it's going, so for the moment we need to be prepared for both. To be able to look at the stem cell created kidney and say, well, what is it missing? Are all the structures there? Is this going to function normally, or is this person going to pee out all their body water in an hour and crump and die? So yeah.
So the follow-on to that perfectly is the stem cells. Are we going to harvest them when we're children, or so that we're saving them for future use? Is this?
There are possibilities of adult stem cells. There are neonatal stem. There are the ethical problems with using fetal origin cells. There's a whole spectrum of things, but it is conceivable that all these cells could be adult origin cells which we're able to turn on to create whatever organ we want, and that could possibly work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Come on, what's the worst that could happen? Go to a microphone, try out your microphone speaking skills here. Yeah. Turn it on so the green light.
Okay. Oh,
there.
that's loud.
You're
that's
on.
Loud.
Cool.
Okay. So yeah, I was just wondering about the part with the virtual or artificial intelligence developing and then crafting their own society somehow. So I was wondering, because you mentioned that it could be a hostile world with all these different programs battling, but I'm picturing it as sort of like a black box, and there's something going on there, and it's whirring away, and there's all these programs that might be fighting over resources, and we don't really know. I'm not picturing, these things taking up robot bodies and, doing Terminator style.
Well, one way to think about it is think about the decisions that these very, very smart, very, very tiny virtual agents might be making that would affect your world. You might find when you look out the window that the world is greener than it's ever been, because they know how to do that, and they really think having a lot of green plants and lots of oxygen being produced is a really cool thing. So everywhere you go, there's just green plants everywhere, and the world, you can think of that Kermit the Frog song, "It Ain't Easy Being Green." Suddenly everybody's singing that because green is everywhere you go. And there's nothing you can do about it because the people controlling the world think about you the same as you think about an ant or a grasshopper on your way here. It's not that they think about you unkindly, it's just that you're so darn stupid and uninteresting that it doesn't matter what you think. So I would imagine that these highly sentient beings could be making tremendous changes in the world that to them look like they would be a very positive thing, like having many more plants, regulating the levels of the oceans, the many things that we can conceive of, that if you were in charge of the whole world, you yourself might conceivably decide to do. But they would have many more, abilities to work out all this stuff. So I think that's what we might notice is these big picture things occurring, around us, and we wouldn't really understand why. Having your environment change and not really understand why is something that already happens in many places. I don't think it's so true here, but really big, institutions like I trained at Johns Hopkins. We always felt that nobody really understood why the institution was doing what it was doing. There was probably somewhere some powerful person who really knew what was going on, but most of us peons didn't, And I think it's similar at other very large places where the institution moves with a kind of momentum that seems okay, that benefits people generally, but you don't really know why the individual decisions are made. So we're already experiencing that a little tiny bit in our own lives. It would just be, like a millionfold greater than that our, ability to figure out why the world was changing the way it was would just be almost zero.
Okay, but then at the end of the day, it's not humans that are making those decisions. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes, I think so, but we don't really know how it's going to work, and there would be an intermediate period where many, at least high status humans, and this whole problem of elitism and whether this would play out for everybody or just a selected few, but where the brains of many human beings would be mostly machines, that most of their intellect would come from the machine implant. And so depending upon how much of them was machine, they might be able to sort of understand what's going on in a sense. It doesn't mean the biological part of their brain would understand, but overall they would understand because most of their thinking power would come from machines rather than from their own biological brain.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have other questions, but I don't want to take up anybody else's.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, I had one more question,
Yeah,
and
sure.
that was about the belief in immortality changing behavior. I didn't quite understand. I guess if you have a backup copy, you're saying that people might not really care if something bad happened to them because they can just.
Yeah, I was talking about the dysphoria of youth. I don't know if any of you believe in this as a concept. A lot of the world is looking enviously on young people trying to think, oh, it was so great when I was young. I wish I was young again. But actually, when you're young, you don't have as much power. You may feel not very significant in the world. There are all sorts of things. These things would be magnified manyfold. And most people, when they're growing up, you don't think about yourself dying until a certain point. So maybe like at the age of 12, the idea of you dying just doesn't make any sense. You think you're going to be immortal, live forever, and then at some point that changes. So I think all these caricatures of what dysphoria of youth is like today would be much more severe when it's clear that you are really insignificant. that the powers of the world could care less about you, and that you are indeed immortal in the sense that if you go out and do some crazy thing and get smushed by a semi, that you'll just be backed up from, the latest software, and you may have lost a few hours of your life, but otherwise you just keep going on. And so your risk-taking behavior might also be the only fun thing you can do. You can't really get the attention of the people in charge of the world. They will never care about you. So you're trying to do things yourself that are maximally exciting. And so that's where the risk-taking and getting killed and being restored from, backup. That's
Okay.
the idea there. Yes?
Go for it.
I have an opposite point on that one.
Yeah.
So we're talking about scarcity of resources. You're not going to have an infinite number of bodies, so that you might have 9 lives, but you're not going to have an infinite number. So I'm thinking that there's still going to be some kind of value placed on your life. Maybe not as much as you want individual bodies.
And one of the worst things, I don't know if many of you know about the Lifeboat Foundation, but if you look into it, and I know I've done videos for Lifeboat and so on, but that doesn't mean I'm directly associated with them. They just asked me to do videos. But it sounds very much, elitist, like the future cannot be provided to everyone. And let's just find a small cadre of select, individuals and assure that they survive for the future. So maybe it will turn out the only people who can live these multiple lives are a very select few, and everybody else is suffering in, the trenches without having any of these, benefits. I don't know. But it's not something where we're just passive victims of the future. We can actually determine what the future is in a number of ways. It's not exactly making the future. Part of it is making statements about the future, right? Like saying, well, that would be unfair. I want everybody to have access to these, technologies. That wouldn't it be fun for everybody to have a second persona where if you want to go out on a date and go to a ball game and be in a bar and do stuff your girlfriend doesn't like, but you want to be with her, that you can do all those things at the same time. And then at the end of the evening, you can consolidate all those different beings that are all you, bring them all back, together, just like in a, video game where you're doing the multi-boxing thing. Why shouldn't everybody be able to do that? Well, what will the resources required be? We really don't know what the limits might be. In a very, benevolent world, there would be some sort of government that's making better decisions than any government has ever made, better than the ethical decisions that any of you in this room could possibly make, and just such a wise government that everybody's happy and doing well. You can imagine that that's theoretically possible. Doesn't seem very likely to me, but that's one potential outcome here, and they would decide what's best given whatever resource limitations there are. How many people should be allowed to have a second or third or fourth or fifth self, and what should the rules be? So we just don't know, but it's within our capability by talking about this, by making statements about what we think, and by researching it, we can help to shape how it actually turns out. It's not determined today. How is it going to turn out? Yes. Yeah.
So here I found some contradictory issue. So one is for the singularity. It means these things can make the evolutions by themselves. So and you mentioned the evolution has two kind of evolutions. Here we pay attention to the technological evolution, not the biological evolution, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's when we talk to David Pierce, this is something that becomes very interesting because that's what he's talking about. He's talking about genetic modification of human beings so that your children will be incapable of feeling pain. They will have a greater pleasure possibility than you have and be unable to feel pain. And this, he believes, would come about by selecting for the right genes. There are already genes that can make you more or less sensitive to pain. One can figure out actually how you would, manipulate the human genome to make it so that your children would be unable to feel pain. And that's exactly what he's talking about. Now, he admits that it's probably slower than the kind of technology-based change that we're talking about. But if we chose it, we could maybe make it happen. In other words, he's saying the technological singularity, where machines are smarter than we are, may occur before we're able to genetically manipulate the genes of our children so they can't feel pain. But if we focused on that, maybe we could make that occur before or at the same time as this other time at which machines are smarter than we are. The singularity coming about through some biological advance where human biological intelligence just increases very, very rapidly seems like very unlikely to happen. It's not absolutely impossible. On the other hand, it's something that makes more sense to us. We can imagine our biological brains becoming smarter, being able to think better with them. We can't really imagine having a machine implant and sharing thinking with this machine. We can't really figure out how that would work. It's much harder to kind of conceptualize that, I think.
Yes, so for the technological evolutions, there should be two parts of them. One is that it's usually happened for computers. People try to accelerate the speed of calculation. That's one of the evolution for the technology. But the main change happened for the concept change, right? Such as the cloud computing. That's a new idea for do the calculations, and all the technological evolutions, big change usually happen in the concept change. So if the machine can do the concept change, so that means it can think like a human. So if the machine can think about the things like humans, we may have the ethic problem, right? Because it's just like some movies, the robots can think like a human and it act like a woman, like a human. How could we treat them? We treat them as just a machine or as a human. And if it have the capacity to think about things like human, will they try to colony us or do some other things? Because we cannot control that.
I think those are all very good questions. When our thinking is mainly machine thinking, will we still be motivated for the good of the biological person? Will it still matter what our name is? The fact that the idea that we're working on that's now 1% human brain based and 99% machine based, is it important that our name be on that because we started the idea? Because the idea will have modified so much. And I think you're quite right that we're not just talking about overclocking. You can take a computer and get it to go faster by having the processor go faster. I don't think that's what it would be like. change here comes about when computers become capable of doing more broad-based things. That's when they become similar to us. Not when they just become much, much faster, but when they become as flexible, as broad in their, address to the world. Whatever comes to them from the world, they're able to handle. So I think that's the point at which they really challenge us as the entity running the world. So it's kind of nice. This is the end of the class period, but there's no other class here, which makes us more relaxed than we've ever had. We are always racing to get out of here, so it's kind of cool that we won't be in that circumstance. But anyway, thank you very much for coming today, and we have much to look forward to on Thursday. You may know Patrick Pilarski, who's about your own age. He already has his own TED Talk. He's talking about smart prosthetic limbs. Why should you just have a big thing? Why shouldn't it be more capable than what the human limb would have been? And so that's what he's talking about. He's a very dynamic young guy, and I think you'll enjoy Thursday a lot. And then next week is Shauna Pandya, her lecture on Tuesday, and then the workshop on Thursday about entrepreneurship in medicine. So your capability to make money in the world may go way up astronomically next week. So there's nothing bad about that, eh? So anyway, see you on Thursday. Thanks. Bye-bye.